This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good morning, Rabbi. Welcome back to our voyage where we're discussing the halachic ramifications of the terrible disaster of the Titanic. But in order to understand that, we're trying to get some of the historical background and some of the details which are also of significance in just from a Jewish perspective. We're still on our first handout, and right under the picture on your sheets of the butcher, cook, and mashgiach of the Titanic, we have over here an account where some of the wealthiest Jews of the time were on board, including Isidor Strauss, who was 68, and Benjamin Guggenheim, who was 47. Other prominent individuals were Henry Harris from New York, Emil Brandeis from Nebraska. Okay, let's just quickly finish up this sheet because the rest of it is more just like trivia information. What's interesting is, as is the typical way of the newspapers and the press, so whatever the press could get their hands on, every detail. Anybody know in Hebrew what the word pisas mean? Pisas meida efshari? A piece, basically. Whatever pieces of information they could get their hands on, they did. In fact, it's brought over here that one of the technicians who was mostly responsible for the boat was a Jew from Lodz who did not make it onto the maiden voyage. And as soon as Titanic went missing, so a reporter by the name of Sumrai went to the coast, and where there was a lot of commotion and people organizing some different types of relief efforts, and the interviewer also came from Lodz, and he interviewed this technician who was from the same city that he was from, and that was considered somewhat of an interesting coincidence that both the interviewer and the technician were both from the same city. Okay, in any event, take a look in the second last paragraph on the right-hand side. So World Jewry was very interested in what happened, and there were efforts made to try to list all the names of Jewish passengers on the Titanic. Now, the most important source and the most reliable source of information was England, because it was closest to the event. And actually, there was a newspaper in Warsaw where there was a letter printed from a correspondent of the newspaper who was in London, who interviewed many sochenei kartisim. What's a sochen? The agent, good, the ticket agent. Try to get info. How many tickets did you sell to Jewish passengers? Okay, so in the first days after the accident, Medavach, HaJewish Chronicle, I guess Medavach means reported. The Jewish Chronicle reported on a Jew by the name of Adolf Saalfeld, who was a travel agent from Manchester, who was one of the passengers in first class, and basically this newspaper was asking for anybody have any information about him. There was a travel agent by the name of Kahan who sold tickets to somebody by the name of Yaakov Cook, who was 43, Gershon Cohen, who was 19, and their whereabouts were not known. There was another travel agent by the name of Feldman, and he reported that there was a Jew by the name of Shimon Meisner, who's 34, who we don't know what happened to him. So basically various reports came out from various travel agents who said and told us about people who they sold tickets to. Well, here we have in that time the Jewish Chronicle try to piece together whatever information they could, try to make a list of those Jews who were rescued and those Jews who were not. And by the way, yes, many hundreds of bodies were able to be pulled out of the water. Obviously not alive, but in the immediate aftermath, they were able to. In fact, a lot of the people who were on the boats said that the sea looked like it was littered with bodies. More than the wreckage, they saw bodies everywhere. But I read they literally pulled out hundreds of bodies. I'm not sure exactly how many. Okay. So after 3 weeks, they came out with a list of 14 Jews who emigrated from Russia to America, and they added a list of the women who were saved. Okay, little by little, through world intervention, the more information came out. In fact, if you look in the records of Tzalav Ha'adam, the Red Cross in America, and you look in file number 457, it talks about the loss of life of a Jew from Russia, somebody who have great financial acumen, chushim finansiyim mifutachim, somebody of financial acumen, she'egia midar America, he came from South America to New York to meet his mother, who was an almana, and his 3 sisters, and to try to help them financially, and he died, and he left over quite a big Yerusha, and his mother had come to be Toiveya, the Yerusha. She wanted the money. Okay. There was another paper that went out in Berlin, and the date was the 9th day of Iyar, that said a lot of Jews from Moliv who came to emigrate to America were on the ship. Okay, one last story, sort of a sad story. There was a couple, Emil and his wife Talia, and their daughter Rus. That's the only connection basically we have to Shavuos in this year, who were emigrating from Austria and coming to America. And when they let down the women onto the lifeboats, so the woman was smart, and she grabbed her husband, and she would not let go of him, to basically schlep him onto the lifeboat. However, in one moment where she was distracted and she called for her daughter, at that moment the sailors wrestled her husband free, put him back on board, and unfortunately he did not make it, and she did. But the bottom line is, he reports over here, no consolidated list of the names of the Jews who were perished and the names of the Jews who were saved was ever made. And like we saw yesterday, here we have a picture of Jews who were rescued and who were being assisted by an agency in New York. Here we have on the bottom the picture of the Jewish section of the cemetery in Halifax of Jews who perished in the Titanic. And then finally, you have on the back of your ship, we mentioned this is the grave of Yaakov Birnbaum from Antwerp, with interesting, a picture of the Titanic with a graven image of the Titanic on his kever, which is quite remarkable. That that the relatives would want to memorialize exactly how he died. It says on his kever, on the gravestone, it says Titanic in big in Hebrew, and as well as here we have a grave of Sinai Cantor, who lives in Queens, who is buried here in Queens, also with the word Titanic in big letters. Okay, so that's sort of finishing up what we read yesterday. Today we want to begin a little bit of a new aspect of it. Again, we're not ready yet for the halachos, but this is also of interest, certainly of interest. Okay, so part 2 really is going to record sort of miraculous stories of Jews who, for some reason or another, did not make it onto the Titanic on that day, or Jews who were on the Titanic and miraculously were rescued and saved. Now, again, to have stories like that from 10 years ago or 20 years ago, it's one thing, but to be able to do the research and figure out, the different geschäft of why Yiddelach 100 years ago did not make it onto the Titanic, that's also pretty interesting. Okay, so let's begin in part 2. Let's begin in part 2. So here, Yehudim shenizmazel mazolim le'ola aniyah. The Jews who had the good fortune not to make it onto the ship. By the way, you have over here quite a remarkable picture and an even more poignant caption. You have, by the way, do you know how many people gathered in Belfast, Ireland, to witness the maiden voyage of the Titanic? On April 3rd, 1912, 100,000 people came to Belfast, Ireland, to see the Titanic embark. 100,000 people. But the caption here is very poignant. Mabitim behispalos. They're looking on in great amazement. V'lo yodim she'ein lahem b'mal lekanot. They don't realize they don't have anything to be jealous of. You know, those people were getting on that luxury liner. Everybody looking on in jealousy, but they didn't realize that they didn't have what to be jealous about. But that's a very important lima. That's the way it is with everything. You know, people look on with jealousy, and in most cases, they don't realize that there's a reason that Hashem did not give them what they wanted. Okay, in any event, so you have over here, Harava Chosam Vorsa Rabbi Yosel Halprin. The famous Rabbi Yosel Halprin. I don't think he was so famous. Michoshvei Chasidei Cherkov. A Cherkov Chassid, and he was one of the founders of Torah institutions in Manchester. He told over the following story. So there was a woman, and her father bought a ticket for her to get onto the boat. And before departure, they came to Rabbi Yisrael Friedman. Who's Rabbi Yisrael Friedman? The Admir of the Cherkova. The Admir of Cherkov. Yeah, to be able to get a bracha before they travel. By the way, there is halacha. It's even brought in, Kitzur Shulchan Aruch brings it, that before you go on a trip, you're supposed to get a bracha from the Rav of the city. So that's what they did. So the Rebbe asked, "Nu, why are you going to America?" They said, "In America, we don't have any parnas over here." Yeah, we hope we'll have parnas over there. So the Higiv al Kacho Admar. Higiv means he responded. He responded as follows: "Los Grisin dem Amerikaner Gott." Send regards to the God of America. Meaning, obviously, you don't believe in God over here, so send regards to the God of America. Yeah? So, Masr, Jewish Hashem Lekamer, send regards to the God of America. So, you know, they were bewildered. Amar Nivov and Ishtamim. The Rebbe said, what, God can't help you over here, that you have to go to America? So they listened to the Rebbe. I don't know if they had Parnasa, but at least they had life. You know, and they didn't make it onto the boat. Okay, here's another one. Shmiras hachag hitzila echad sheskaven lahafleg. So keeping the Yom Tif saved another person's life. Here you have a story like this. Shliach ho'iton der Freund Havar Shoi. The name of this paper is Der Freund from Warsaw. Re'iyain. What does the word re'iyain mean? It means to interview. As echad mi sochnei anasio shemar kartis alaniya. He interviewed one of the travel agents. His name was Adon Zamper. He was an Orthodox Jew, observant Jew. Sochin zehayed l'fnei shliach iton. The travel agent reported, he sold second-class ticket to a Jew. So he gave him, down payment. Pesach's passing, and he didn't pay the rest of the fare. On the day before the departure, it was a Tuesday, Achron Shel Pesach. Very interesting. The boat left the day after Pesach.
Well, it couldn't depart on Pesach because
That's so many Jewish. So the boat left Tuesday, the day after Pesach. Nizgar hala shadayin lo paras hatashlim. So Nizgar hala shadayin lo paras. So he remembered that he didn't pay. So v'nigash adon zemper kedei lahazez hasofi. Basically, the guy realized he didn't pay, so he went to the travel agent to pay the rest of the fare. So Zemper said, "Get out of here! I don't do business on Yom Tov." The guy said, "But I'm not going to be able to get I guess he wouldn't be able to get his ticket, so he said, "What could I do?" So So the purchaser said, "Oh, Nebuch, I'll wait for the next ship," and his life was saved because the travel agent kept the Hilchos Yom Tov. Okay. Here's another one. There's okay. Rabbi Yitzchak Yaffa was one of the residents of the Batei Varsha in Yerushalayim.
I know that family.
Yitzchak Yaffa?
Half the family, very touching family in Yerushalayim.
Okay. It's somewhat of a common name, but maybe. Ultimately, he was going to be appointed as the head of the Kollel Poland in Yerushalayim. And, ultimately he would appoint, as the head of the Kollel, the son of the Reb Shlomo Zalman Friedman. Well, in the year 1909, one of his children, a young boy by the name of Moshe, he realized, this is not happening for us here in the Batei Varsha in Yerushalayim. The poverty was rampant. Hashanias hashereres bebais oicheles b'chol peh. I think that's an expression. I looked it up this morning. Oicheles b'chol peh. It's like the poverty is just taking over everything. It's like sucking the life out of everything. It's just destroying any good aspect of the house. So he's thinking to himself, how am I going to improve my situation here? He's a young kid, he's 16 years old. He says, the only good thing to do, I got to get out of here, I'm going to England. Now his father, Aviv K'muvan Lo Ahav Es Harayon Hanoaz. His father did not like Harayon Hanoaz. What is Noaz? Lashon of Az. The bold idea. His father did not like this bold idea. Ablas Breira Henekes Rishus, so he didn't have a choice, so he gave his permission. So the kid Moshe, who's the son of Reb Shlomo Zalman Friedman, he comes to England, and he lives in very, very strained conditions. And what does he do for a living? He's a Baal Tefillah in different shuls. Kimuvan, this is not the best.
Moshe Friedman? Moshe Yaffa.
Unclear. And so he comes.
In front of the great synagogue is
Yeah.
dedicated by the name of Moshe Yaffa.
I don't know. So the Kitzer, he comes to England, and in England, life is not like it is in the Batei Varsha in Yerushalayim. There's a spirit of liberalism. It's a freer place, and things are not like they are back in Yerushalayim. And this kid sort of adapts to his new surroundings, and he has no choice. He's not in Yerushalayim anymore. About 2 years later, he's not being successful. So his friends say, look, this is not the place to be. You got to go to America, Eretz HaZahav. There, that's where you're going to make a living. So he sent a letter to his parents, and this time his father said, no, this is, the buck stops here. You ain't going to America. You go to America, you're going to lose all vestiges of your Yiddishkeit. Okay, I don't give you permission. Well, the kid doesn't listen to his father. He's not living with the father. Anyway, he buys a ticket, and he guess which ship he buys a ticket for? Titanic. Fine. He can't even afford the ticket, so they agree to let him on. He's going to work the ovens in the Titanic. Okay, what happens? The hull of the ship is gashed open by the iceberg, and Moshe realizes his end is coming close. He lifts up his eyes to Shamayim, and he makes a neder that if he's saved, he will return to his Judaism and become a full-fledged Shomer Torah Mitzvahs. And Nisim, somehow he's saved. How? We have no idea. Maybe he's one of these guys on the boats over here. I don't know. I can't tell. He was third. He was in the steerage. Anyway, he comes to America and he marries a Jewish woman, and he sets up from home. He lives in Manhattan, and every day after work, he would go to the Beis HaMedrash and he would learn till the wee hours of the night, a survivor of the Titanic. Okay, then we have another story. We have a couple more short ones, and then this one is incredible. Okay. Another woman who was saved, her name was Maras Chana Mindel Sperling. Okay. So we have a Rituk Lamita. What does Rituk mean? She was confined to her bed. That's what saved her. So she lived in Galicia, in Lubitshov. And what happened? The last moment, her family was emigrating to Berlin. And ultimately, they were going to go to New York and meet up with the rest of the family. Okay. So together with a bunch of her friends, she bought they bought a group tickets to the Titanic. And the day before the trip, she came down with a terrible fever. She's confined to her bed. She could not leave the bed, and Nebuch, she missed her trip. But because of that, her life was saved. She ended up marrying a chassid, Rabbi Schechter, and they had many righteous generations. Okay, 2 more, and then the grand finale here. So we have over here a guy, a Jew, by the name of Mr. Joseph Abraham Hyman. He was a frum Jew from South Manchester. Why everyone's coming from Manchester, Pinklach today, can't tell you. He left his wife, Esther, and his 4 kids behind, and he went to New York to try to get a job. Now, this guy Hyman was not that capable of a job. He was not the most. Did not have the money to buy a first-class ticket, and he basically bought a ticket in 3rd class, the cheapest he could find. And when the hull was gashed open, he was Mekadeshim Shamayim. Instead of thinking about saving himself, he started to help all the women and children get into the lifeboats. And somehow he was pushed onto the lifeboat himself. How that happens, unclear. And he comes to New York. He's traumatized. He's traumatized of travel, and the problem is, his family is back in Europe, and they're trying to figure out how they're going to get him onto the boat back to his family. So Baruch Hashem, they came up with an eitzav l'chein nelatz achiv lashkosei alcohol. They gave him a lot of alcohol to drink. They pushed him onto the boat, and they sent him back to Europe. I have a feeling he had a more pleasant ride on the way back than on the way there. Okay. Okay, Marva Rabbi. One more story here. There's a story that's swirling around among the Staliner Hasidim. There are 2 Staliner Hasidim. They were brothers. They come to the Rebbe Yisrael Perlau of Stalin, and they told him, Rebbe, we're about to embark on a trip to America. Please give us a bracha. And the Rav said, Nein! And they didn't go. And that's the end of the story. It's a good thing they listened to the Rebbe. Okay, here's the best story of all. This story we have over here in a very abridged version. And I'm going to tell you the longer edition, and I'll tell you where I read it afterwards. Okay, so basically, if you want to see it bekitzer, you have it on your sheet. So it's April 3rd, 1912. 100,000 people come to Belfast to see Titanic embark on its maiden voyage. Biggest ship ever. 46,329 tons. Accommodates more than 2,000 passengers. And it was advertised as the most durable ship ever made. The ship that even God could not sink. Okay. 1910, a Yidula by the name of Mr. Sam Axe of Turek, Poland. He immigrates to England, and he marries a woman by the name of Leah Rosen. Okay. They lived in London for a short while after the wedding, and then they decided they're going to move to America, where there are better business opportunities, and the plan was to move, yes, to my favorite internet location, Norfolk, Virginia. Okay. So, here's the problem. The problem was Leah was expecting her first child, and her parents felt that she was not in condition to travel. She was too weak. It would not be healthy for her. It would not be healthy for the baby. So the plan was Sam's going to travel alone to America, set up shop in Norfolk, get a job, and when the child would be a few months old, Leah would come with the infant. Okay, so Titanic was about to make its historic voyage from England. Where in England? Who remembers? Southampton, April 1912, the White Star Line, the flagship company of Titanic. So April 10th, Leah acts and her baby. 912 other passengers board the ship in Southampton, and it was accompanied by great fanfare and ceremony. So where is Leah? Leah is in third class. She's in the steerage with many other immigrants. High-class people, obviously in the luxurious first class. There were still a number of other stops before they would arrive at their ultimate destination. 4 days later, right before midnight, April 14th, 95 miles south of the Grand Banks of Newfoundland.
So it's much closer to the U.S. shore.
Okay.
Than out in the middle of it.
So its side swiped the iceberg, which was hidden beneath the surface. 95% of the iceberg was hidden below the water. That means the iceberg measured 1,000 feet from top to bottom. And its knife-like edges cut open, we said, 5 chambers of the hull of the ship. And Thomas Andrews, is that his name? What was his name? The captain.
Smith. Howard Smith.
Oh, so Edward Smith contacts the designer, Thomas Andrews, and Thomas Andrews said, give the ship 2 hours, and it's sunk. Okay? We mentioned there are only enough lifeboats for 1,178 people, and begins tilting. There was panic, pandemonium, and the captain orders women and children first. So, in the third class cabin, the women are ordered out. So Leah acts, holds her son. Her son's name is Frank Philip. In Hebrew, Ephraim Fischel. And she tries to get out on deck. But the gate in front of the cabin, we mentioned, was jammed. Nobody could get out of the third deck. So she stands there pressed against the gate, screaming for help, holding her kid. A sailor sees her with her baby in arms. He reaches over the gate, lifts up the woman and child, and brings her to the deck. Okay, by the way, most people in third class drowned. 75% of third class drowned. 40% of first class died. Okay, so they fared better in the first class. So Leah runs up to the deck and waited with her child by the railing to try to get online to be rescued. It's freezing cold. It's frighteningly cold. It's the North Atlantic. People were pushing. People were shoving, trying to get into lifeboats. Meanwhile, down below, the water is gushing thunderously through the gaping holes of the hull of the ship. By the way, this is a side note in history. On the deck, there was a woman, one of the wealthiest women in history, was standing on deck next to her. Lady Madeline Astor. Okay? What? Okay, she sees her. She sees the baby huddled in the cold. Lady Astor was expecting at the time. She was wearing an 8-foot shawl. She took off her shawl, gave it to Leah, wrapped up the baby. She said, it's cold. Leah thanks her profusely, and her teeth are chattering. Fine. Now, during this whole time, there was a man who pushed his way onto a lifeboat and was about to be lowered into the water. And the stewards discovered him. They forced him out of the boat. They said, no, women and children first, which they were stupid because we mentioned the first couple of boats were only filled to half capacity. Fine. The man manages then to get onto a different lifeboat, and once again the stewards saw him, forced him off the lifeboat, and they were fighting with him. Women and children have priority. So now this man is enraged. They kicked him off the second lifeboat, and he lays his eyes on Leah, who's holding the baby wrapped in the shawl. And this guy is stalking back and forth, and he's filled with anger, frustration, and in a moment of madness, he runs toward Leah screaming, you think women are first? You think children are first? I'm going to show you. He grabs the child, and he throws the child overboard. Leah shrieks in horror. The men on the board lunged at the maniac, but it was too late. It was obvious the baby plunged to an icy death and certainly died in the waters. Now, unbeknownst to all the passengers on board, there was already a woman down below in a lifeboat, and her name was Mrs. Elizabeth Rammel Nye. This Mrs. Elizabeth Rammel Nye was dressed in a long black dress, which was embroidered with a huge cross. This woman was a nun and never had children, and as this nun waited on the lifeboat and waited to be rescued, She stuck out her arms in a gesture of prayer, and just at that moment, the baby fell into her arms. So to her, this was a sign from heaven that she was given a son from God and to care for this child for the rest of her life. Meanwhile, on board, Leah screamed, "I'm not getting off the boat without my kid." The officers dragged her onto another lifeboat. They said, why should both of you die? And she's on the lifeboat, people trying to console her to no avail. She's crying hysterically, and she's placed in the lifeboat and lowered into the water. Okay, the lifeboats, they drift for 3 hours until the Cunard liner, the Carpathia, came and rescued those who were fortunate enough to get off the Titanic. How many were saved? 705 people were saved. 1,523 people died. 2 days later, the grieving Leah Axe was walking on the deck of the Carpathia. She sees a woman holding a child. The child lunges toward Leah. She recognizes the kid. It's her kid. She screams, "That's my baby, that's my baby." The nun said, "No, it's not your baby. This child was entrusted to me by God." So there's a wild argument that breaks out on the Carpathia. People were taking sides, and soon the captain of the Carpathia, Arthur H. Rostrum, was called to Paskin, to use his Solomonic wisdom to figure out who does this child belong to. Leah is crying hysterically. Mrs. Nye was insisting on her position, and Captain Rostrum comes. He hears both arguments, and he orders both of them to come with him to his quarters, and he's going to reflect and decide the matter. Okay. All of a sudden, Leah screams out, "I could prove it's my kid." Said, "How?" Now, Leah was 18 years old at the time. She said, "I'm Jewish. My son was just given a bris milah." And because in Europe in the time, it's not like America, only Jews were given circumcision. So, Captain sees that indeed the child had a bris. Leah was awarded her baby, and the 10-month-old Ephraim Fischel was reunited with his mother. Eventually, the Carpathia brought all the survivors to New York. Okay, so Ephraim Fischel Axe was raised in his rightful Jewish home. He married, he had children, grandchildren. He passed away in 1991 at the age of 80. And he would walk miles every Shabbos to the Orthodox shul in Norfolk, known as the Cumberland Street Shul. So I don't know if his descendants are listening in Norfolk on Torah anytime, but it's still an interesting thought. Okay. Now, what's very interesting is that after the traumatic events of the journey, Leah was so grateful to the captain that years later she had a daughter, and the daughter's name was Sarah Carpathia Axe. And apparently there was some confusion in by the hospital secretaries, and her recorded name in the hospital on her birth certificate said Sarah Titanic Axe. So it's always a good idea to give your kid a bris milah. You never know when you might need it. Okay. What? So that's right over here. It's in the book. It also happens to be in one of the Maggid books. I think Splendor of the Maggid. Okay. One more, and then what time is it? Yeah, one more, and then we'll break. So now there's, obviously we had some good stories with the chart cover and Stalin. So one last story. There is some legend with the Baal HaTanya and the Titanic, and there is somebody by the name of Moshe Nisselvitz who wrote a sefer about the power of the Sefer Tanya, and he brings a story from the Rashab of Lubavitch, right, who supposedly tried to save one of his Hasidim from traveling on Titanic. And it's based on a true story that happened well before the Titanic happened, but really did not happen with the Titanic. Well, this is what is recorded. There was a certain Jew who had a connection with the Rebbe Rashab, and he comes to Rashab with his son-in-law, and he tells the Rebbe that his son-in-law decided to travel on a boat. So the Rashab says, "No, I'm not maskim. He can't travel on this boat." So the son-in-law said, "Rebbe, I want a bracha." The Rebbe said, "Here's the bracha. Don't go on the boat." So the son-in-law said, no, I got to go on the boat. So the Rebbe said, no, if you have to go on the boat, at least take the Sefer Tanya on the boat with you and learn the Sefer Tanya. Okay. So he leaves the Rebbe and he prepares the Tanya. The father-in-law prepares the Tanya to give to his son-in-law before the trip. What happened? The son-in-law traveled and he drowned in the Atlantic. So the father-in-law heard, he ran to the Rebbe. He said, Rebbe, why didn't you tell us that it was going to drown? If that was the case, we would have tied him up with chains, we wouldn't let him travel. Because Rebbe, guess what happened? Guess what he forgot to take with him? He forgot to take the Sefer Tanya with him. So said the Rebbe, that's why he drowned, because he didn't take when you don't listen to me, that's what happens. Okay. Anyway, that's the supposed story. However, this story is Loi Haya Dvar Me'olam, Nishka Steigen, Nishka Fleigen. It's basically, the source of the story is a combination of 3 little maisalach that were strung together, nothing to do with Titanic. Okay. Anyway, Marv Rabbi Sai, here, these are some of the hashgacha pratis that are intertwined with this very tragic episode, and we will get to the halachic aspects of this unfortunate disaster soon. Okay, have a good break, and we'll pick it up soon.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.